This is The Final Word Cricket Podcast, Season 16, Episode 13, the weekly program, the one that doesn't have a name aside from being The Final Word because that was the original, and for some people it remains the best. Geoff Lemon and Adam Collins coming to you from neighbouring countries just about in Europe with a long history of sea warfare between them. Portugal and I'm just going to broadly say Britain, and people will get annoyed and say that's not a nation and blah, 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 and all of the different variations. But, you know, we're talking sea power here, so I think it's broadly sustainable.
The treaty. Is it the Treaty of 1389? Norcross was banging on about this during Eurovision when the UK received 4 points from the jury from Portugal, which was rare on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Daniel and I were very, very deeply in the weeds on Eurovision, on both commentary and on WhatsApp through the weekend, as we tend to do at this time of year. We're actually vaguely talking about, thanks to Jack Rule, one of our kind listeners and patrons, doing some kind of test match chauffeury thing next year for Eurovision.
Right.
So watch this space. White Line Wireless-y sort of chauffeury gibberers on a couch doing, you know what it is because you did one for a long time, but yes, it did come up that Portugal and Britain, broadly defined, have a complicated history.
That might have been my doing initially as the catalyst, because when I told Daniel that I'd arrived, his response, which I've just found here, was, congratulations, England, and I use the term advisedly, has its longest unbroken treaty with Portugal. I welcome you, friend, to our entente. So it's always nice to be part of an entente.
Okay.
It was an entente before World War One, wasn't it? With Britain and France and Russia, they had the tripartite pact was some sort of entente, which in the end didn't go too well for anybody involved. But there we are.
Right, what's going on this week? We've got a pretty big show, actually. I wasn't anticipating this being as busy as it is, but there's been a lot going on around the cricketing world, not least in Ireland, where we've seen the Irishmen knock off Pakistan. More on that later. We're nearing the T20 World Cup, more squads being announced. Of course, the James Anderson retirement. We've done a show on that already, but Geoff hasn't had his say. The Geoff Lemon verdict on the James Anderson retirement coming your way in about 5 minutes, I would say, or something like that.
Stamp that gets put on the screen, verdict denied or some shit.
A bit of Monty Panesar fun there, some nerd pledge. We've got the ECB politics stuff, which I think is quite, low-key, extremely important, and it's kind of bubbling away in the background. Some administration nonsense that Geoff always enjoys. Then the county wrap, the IPL wrap, the Rachel Hayhoe Flint trophy wrap. Lots doing.
I'm going to start it off with a weird email that I got. Well, we got in the collective inbox, which we both check. So sometimes I get there first and sometimes you do. From Luke Halpin, coming in from Canberra, we'd said, you have been identified, it was addressed to you, not me, as a contender for the ACT over 40s cricket team competing in the national competition in Perth, commencing the 25th of November 2024. You will qualify on age by that time. And if you are available and in the Perth area towards the end of November, you're invited to participate as part of the ACT Veterans Over 40s. Well, I've always said we need more veteran state representative cricketers on this podcast. I feel that as it is, with only 50% of the hosts having met that criteria.
Yes.
We need to level that up. We need a level playing field. And you will be in Perth near the end of November. So I thought this would tempt you. I don't know what your response is yet.
Well, I am there when this is happening. And you have you've represented the Victorian veterans in the
Indigenous over 50s team, neither of which round I qualified for, but by virtue of availability when needed, yes.
Well, Luke's a listener, and Luke has said that they've lost their second spinner, who they were intending on taking to Perth for this over 40s tournament. And it feels like our schedule will allow me to play a couple of games after the test match is finished between Australia and India. So, curious but interested, might describe where I'm at the moment. It would be very funny putting on, something resembling a Canberra Comets top, given how much that comes up on Storytime and how fascinated I was with the ACT team growing up in the Mercantile Mutual and having played a bit of grade cricket there many years ago.
Stories you could swap with Katie Mack, The Secret World of Katie Mack as Canberra representatives. You could settle down in the pub after a long day in the field and yarn away.
We could get Nathan to play in a few years as well. Nath is 30. 36,
Yeah.
something like that. I know he's a couple of years younger than us. So maybe when he hits 40, he'll certainly still be playing for Australia. He'll probably still be playing county cricket.
Straight into veterans.
Well, Darren Stevens did. Darren Stevens went from playing professional cricket last year to captaining the England over 40s at the recently completed World Cup. I'm not sure if I get the sense that this tournament isn't directly linked to the Australian setup. Right. I mean, that's a separate whole other thing. Sure. This is more, guys of a certain age who are eligible and who can be sort of bothered flying across the country and paying the money and all that kind of thing. So representative side in kind of name only. But still, Nathan Lyon for the ACT over 40s, back where it all began when he was playing in the, was it the Cricket Australia Cup, the second 11, where the ACT had a team in the Comets when he was twirling away for Western Districts University of Canberra, way back when. We will see, but thank you, Luke, for the offer.
Twirling towards freedom.
I'm staying fit for the prospective cricket tournament by running the half marathon in a couple of weeks.
Your running schedule, which was frankly bonkers, but I expect nothing less. Also, Izzy Westbury's stuff, I've been following that along, where she's been posting artfully, I suppose, security-cleared, blurred-out backgrounds of her on various military bases in the Middle East and posting about that. She's also chucking in money as well as running the full 42Ks in Edinburgh, so that's full Izzy Westbury and full Adam Collins.
Yeah, that's right. She's chucked in 300 quid. I love you, Izzy. She said it's on behalf of the Royal Air Force personnel serving in the Middle East who kindly donated amidst the heat and sweat of various athletic endeavours. So great work, Izzy, gathering some money there. I think has she done 900 miles in prep or something absolutely absurd.
Nearly 1,000. She's something 905 or something.
So I'm nowhere near that level of madness. I've been doing the yards. I've got my last long run today. I'm going to run 15K this afternoon, and that'll see me out. I'll be able to taper, using that word, in air quotes, for the last little bit and go for a few quieter runs. But it's been really fun. The group's terrific. We've got so many social activities around it. The shoulder of the weekend on the Friday and on the Sunday night, with the activity, the running happening on the Saturday and Sunday mornings. But lots of pledges coming through. We're well above 10,000 quid now. Our target remains 30,000. Jeff Price, who we love on this show, he's always nerd pledging. Jeff Price. He has a personalised nerd pledge T-shirt made up, which includes his first number that he submitted and the answer of it on the breast of the shirt, which is great. He submitted £117 because Dan, his son, who's the wicketkeeper in the Final Word 11 and ODB and many other teams, that was Dan's first century. He made 117. So Jeff's contribution reflects that, which I thought was pretty cool. So, can't wait to see Izzy in a couple of weeks in Edinburgh. I know how excited Winnie gets when she knows she's going to see you, Jeff. Uncle Jeff. It's the same for Izzy. Auntie Izzy. So it'll be the first time since she's returned from, she's back from the Middle East this week. So that's pretty cool. We'll all be together. All the links are on that link tree in the show notes. Please donate if you can. This is the moment to do it. Help us charge to the finish line. £30,000. You know why. The Lord's Tavern is doing great work in the community, and we really want to reach that milestone.
We're also charging backwards through the archive episodes, and we're nearly there. The first few seasons of The Final Word got lost from the internet because they weren't on our feed, so we've been repopulating the feed with those. We're back to episode 2 of season 1, so there's only one official episode to go. That was after the Edgbaston Test of 2015, when, with a certain twist of timing, James Anderson got injured during that test match and would not be available for the following test in Trent Bridge. A couple of highlights in that show being in episode 2 that we ever made. This is with Will McPherson and Subhash Jayaraman, because you were at somebody's wedding, I think. But
I was back for the Labor Party National Conference where I was a delegate, so I had to rush home for that. That's why I wasn't there for that test.
Now, there were 2 bits. One is that the first mention of Charles Bannerman and the highest percentage of runs in a test innings was made on episode 2 of the show. We got in so early on that because you may not remember David Warner was above 67% at one point when in the third innings of the game when he was smashing away for runs, and we thought he might get the Bannerman. And the other great bit is that with Anderson out, I very, very sincerely turn to Will McPherson and say something like, do you think would you read it as, would the Australians be able to take advantage of a depleted England attack at Trent Bridge? Where, of course, they go on to be bowled out for 60 on the first morning. And as some people on our Discord chat page pointed out, purely because Stuart Broad was able to bowl from the end that James Anderson would normally have bowled for. So the 8 for 15 wouldn't have happened if Anderson had been there. Something else as good might have happened, but you never know.
Yeah, what a day that was, bowling from the pavilion end, 8 for 15. I was sat front row of the press box at the other end, the Radcliffe Road end, I think it is, at Trent Bridge, next to Greg Baum, who's been going on Ashes trips since 1993. I don't know whether he was there in 89. He might have been there in 89, actually, Baumey. And he was like, he'd never seen anything.
State politics and stuff.
Quite.
During the 80s, he was doing state elections and so on.
He did a lot of stuff, Baumey, before he was just doing cricket and footy. But yeah, sat next to him for that was quite the experience because, he's seen so many things covering the Aussie team and then seeing Australia skittled for 60 on the most important day of the series and the broad celebration with the hands over the mouth, the Stokes catch to get rid of Voges. It was a wild day. And I flew in, I think, the night before, returning from that conference. So I was jet lagged and had 2 pieces to write that night. It was the first day I had a newspaper column for The Independent when it was still a newspaper. So I was taking over Damien Fleming's 600 words in the paper because Flemmo had gone home. Bit of pressure, but there was plenty to write about that night. So memorable. And that Edgbaston test. So, and I love the fact that Sebash was on there as well, the original cricket podcast guru that we saw fit to have him on, and coming full circle with Will McPherson, who a decade later is still occasionally hosting the final word when you're not about.
Yes, as is Daniel Norcross. Sometimes I listen to your James Anderson episodes, and as you floated, I would have my swing at it. Can I just say, I fucking hate it. Oh. I hate the way this was set up. I hate everything about it. If Anderson was good enough to get a national contract last October, he's good enough to play now, and there's that English obsession with the next Ashes tour, which is always there, and it's always going to be there to a point. But they've got 5 tests against India next summer. They've got a guy who was apparently good enough to tour India and who bowled really well in very difficult conditions at times during that tour. They've got the most experienced and accomplished bowler that they'll ever have, who's still fit enough to play, apparently. And they're setting it up with this little dinky, we'll squeeze him in for 1 test at the start of the summer to do a farewell lap. If he's going to play this season, he should be playing the season. If he's not going to play on beyond that season, that's one thing. But the way that it was set up, where he's positioning it as being his decision that he decided to make way, but it was with the push of are you going to be on the next plane to Australia in nearly 2 years' time? I mean, that's a long way away, and from my perspective, it doesn't matter if he's on that flight or not. You've still got a player who's got so much to offer, and you've got so much cricket to play. They were talking about 15 tests between now and Australia. I think it's, by our count, it's more like 17 because they've got 6 this summer. They've got 5 against India next year at home. They've got 3 in Pakistan, 3 in New Zealand. They've got 1 against Zimbabwe. So there are so many other spots. You've got 3 fast bowling spots in each side, and Anderson's not going to play 17 tests, even if he did keep going through that period. So, say he plays a dozen of them. You've still got, 50-odd fast bowling spots, and he might take up 12 of them in terms of across that entire journey. And England don't have a sort of commanding next rank of young fast bowlers who are clamouring for those opportunities. They've got a bunch of players who they'd like to have a look at, but it doesn't mean that you want 3 of them in that side. So it just seems like a pointless halfway in between sort of position to put themselves in, where you're getting rid of an asset for this stated purpose, but it's not actually a necessary way to move towards that. And then at the on the flip side of that, you're robbing people of an opportunity to see one of the great players continue to play. And one of the great stories in cricket being the fact that this guy is still fit, still good enough, still up for it, and you're getting rid of him before he's no longer good enough. It just seems an extraordinarily pointless and wasteful thing to do.
Yeah, it won't surprise you to learn that I agree with almost nothing that you've just said then. That's fine. Look, it isn't the case of having 3 spots available in every test match, right? England's objective is going to be to still win each test in front of them. So they're not going to play, this group of fast bowlers, they are trying to reach Australia, at least a few of them, not rocking up with, say, 1 or 2 test caps to their name. They want to make sure that they've got enough experience at test level, that there's some resilience built into that. And we know that tends to be the life cycle of a fast bowler at test level. Even if they start well, it does get hard quite quickly, and they have to find whatever it is within themselves to make it. And not all of them will. And remember, there's about 6 or 7 of them who they're looking at here. It's not 1 or 2. And the problem they've had, if you want to call it a problem, the challenge they've had is probably the better way of framing it, is that until 5 minutes ago, it was Anderson, Broad, the first 2 names on the team sheet, under the McCullum-Stokes regime, acknowledging that when Silverwood and Root, especially towards the end of Root's captaincy tenure, they were already kind of thinking about getting tests into players like Saqib Mahmood played in the Caribbean, Matt Fisher played in the Caribbean. That wasn't in a vacuum. They were thinking about trying to make sure that they gave themselves some flexibility, but not just like changing the whole thing at the same time, but doing it progressively. So because Stokes and McCullum had a different view about winning every test in front of them and fielding what they saw to be their best team throughout and valuing experience, the last 2 years, that's largely been put on hold. Last Ashes summer, you throw Wood and Wokes into the mix. You had Anderson, Broad, Wood and Wokes, who were all, in cricketing terms, well advanced. So there was no room last summer. So Broad's made way. But I guess where I started this point was that because they're still going to want to win test matches this summer, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a combination of Wood and Wokes still used. Wood where fit, Wokes is increasingly an England test specialist. So really it's not 3 spots per bowling attack. It might be 1 or 1.5 if you average it out across the summer.
Right.
And they're looking at using a combination of, well, we've named them before, but Matt Potts is the obvious one, having played 3 really good test matches against New Zealand a couple of years ago. Saqib Mahmood, if he's fit, that is an option. That's someone they've been keen on for a really long time. Bryden Cass is probably the quickest bowler in the country alongside Mark Wood. He's enjoyed some success in white ball cricket for England. Likewise, Gus Atkinson, who bowls north of 90 mile an hour and started his international white ball career really impressively against New Zealand last year. A couple of guys from outside the first class system at the moment who they want to try out. I don't know whether they'll play test cricket straight away, but they want the option to see whether John Turner can make it. Again, there could be some flexibility where there wouldn't have been had Anderson played on. Dylan Pennington, who is an interesting one. He wasn't really being talked about too much, but if you're looking at a more like for Anderson, there's Pennington and Cook, Sam Cook from Essex, who's posting extraordinary numbers season on season. So I don't think it's about opening up all the spots in the bowling attack. It's about having a little bit more flexibility so that they can do some transition planning. And the other thing here is that, Anderson has said himself on his own podcast, so not the ECB statement, his own tail ender show the other day, that he'd volunteered to McCullum that he didn't think he was actually going to make the Ashes. So I think it would have been a different story had he said to McCullum, no, I'm going to make it. I think it's a within himself. He now realises that the probability has waned to such an extent that he's going to give them the best chance they can have of having the group of bowlers they want in good enough nick to have a crack in Australia, which is so hard to do.
Yeah, I don't think it was necessary for him to make it to the Ashes. I don't think he would have necessarily been an asset anyway, even if he had been fit. Going over there where he's hasn't enjoyed that much relative success. He's had a couple of tours where he's bowled better than the figures have returned, and he has the really good one in 10-11. But it's always been hard graft over there. But there's a long way to go between here and there. So the way that I see it, that next bank of England bowlers that you're talking about, there's always been that next bank that people have been excited about. It's Ollie Stone syndrome, I'd call it. There's a quick bowler that people are interested in, and they're unfit most of the time. They're occasionally fit, and then they're often injured. And so that next rank of bowlers is often largely unavailable. A couple of them might be available at any given time, and a lot of them aren't. So you price that.
Not the guys I mentioned, not you sort of, especially Matty Potts and Gus Atkinson. I know Stone's been injured a lot, but again, you wouldn't count him out. He bowled really well. I'm going to talk about him in the county report later. He's had a couple of good games in a row now, Stone, and he's always going to be there and thereabouts.
There's always that hope, but talking about England heading out to Australia last time, it was maybe Archer will be fit, maybe Stone will be fit, maybe Wood will be there. They'll field 3 150k an hour guys, and it just doesn't happen. So making way for people who won't necessarily, where the demand for those spots won't necessarily be as high is one thing. If you're pensioning off Anderson, then what's the point of keeping Chris Wokes around? He's not going to be on the next plane to Australia because he's got an absolutely dismal record outside of England, and he's a wonderful player in England, and that doesn't mean he shouldn't be allowed to play in England. But if your rationale is that you've got to open up spots, what's the use of keeping Wokes but pensioning off Anderson?
But they like Wokes in. You've got to remember, Wokes' role is different to Anderson subtly. I mean, Wokes last year, that's right. It's a subtly different role. I'm not saying it's hugely different, but they do see Wokes as a balancing act at number 7 or number 8. He's done a really good job as an England lower order batter. So, I mean, I get your point about why would you play Wokes if you're not playing Jimmy because Wokes won't go to Australia. That all makes sense. But that comes back to my previous point about them wanting to beat India in England next year and feeling like there'll be sufficient space for one of those types of bowlers in that they'll want to have Wokes still running around, but they'll want to also have that flexibility to see which of those quick guys does have the resilience to make it. Coming back to my point before, who can play series after series, test match after test match. Can Gus Atkinson, who hasn't really suffered much from injury, can he rattle off, 7 test matches out of 10? If he can, that's going to be a huge asset for England in Australia. But they won't know until they know, if you know what I'm trying to say. They won't know until they've actually done it.
In terms of the hardness of work, that makes sense. In terms of playing a lot of Test cricket in England, that doesn't prepare players to play in Australia. There are lots of players who've had terrific records in England who haven't been able to translate it. So if that's their rationale, I don't think that particularly stacks.
But how else do you prepare? How do you prepare for Australia? You got to play somewhere. I mean, the fact that they play 40% of. That's right. They'll play New Zealand and Pakistan over the winter, but I mean, there's no other. You can't artificially manufacture tour games in Australia that aren't going to happen. I guess that you're doing the best you can with the resources you got.
But you can manufacture Lions tours and things like that, and get players out there playing in those conditions, which might be more useful to them than playing a Test match at Nottingham that might be over in 3 days. So there's that aspect of it. And look, I would love to see Sam Cook, for instance, play Test cricket. It would be a great story. But again, I don't necessarily see the point. If you're looking for a like-for-like Anderson player, what's the point? Why not just use Anderson? So all of that just doesn't stack up for me. The fact that they gave him a contract and then they've essentially backed down on that and said, well, we don't really want to have him around anymore, even though he's contracted through to next October. You're getting rid of something really special, and I know. And Daniel sort of facetiously mentioned it, as in, why are they calling him off when he's so close to passing Shane Warne? I don't think that's irrelevant. I don't think that's just an indulgence to look at stats when these things matter to people who follow the sport and who play the sport. You've got such a rare opportunity to give your faster bowler another season, let him try to set a record, let him try to extend the incredible record he's already got. And it does just seem wasteful to not take advantage of that.
Yeah, on less important statistical things, I was slightly obsessed on Saturday night with whilst watching Eurovision on how I could link Jimmy through, the Derek Randall thing that we've done on Storytime before. But the fact that Derek Randall played his first 50-over game, so his first List A game, against Mickey Stewart. Mickey Stewart was born in 1932, and Mickey played his first game in 1954 against the chap who played for Middlesex, who links you back to, you get basically in 5 links in the chain, you get back 115 years into a match that involved Gilbert Jessop, a game that involved Albert Trott, a game that involved Patsy Hendren, and Plum Warner. All in the. I mean, this is an extraordinary way of, and old Jack Hearn's involved in that link in the chain as well, who of course played first class cricket for like 35 years. So, but the wider point here is that Anderson, it does from a fan's perspective. I love the idea of him playing forever. Daniel described it as the experiment. Whether the experiment could continue forever, but I guess it won't be. Before we move off this, Geoff, we don't really know what Jimmy's going to do. Will he be the bowling coach?
My last point on that would be, is your next rank of England player, are they going to be better off playing 9 tests in that sequence or playing 6 tests alongside James Anderson? I think playing with him would be more of a benefit to them than playing with him on the bench, giving him tips.
I suspect he's going to be around. I don't know. It's kind of a weird one, isn't it? Like if you've been in the same environment, I know you feel very passionate about it, but try and extract that for a sec. If you're Jimmy and you're nationally contracted... if you're nationally,
he won't make it on the outside.
There might be a bit of that, but look, he's done a lot of commentary, and that's the logical place for him to move. But he has said before on his podcast that when he's finished playing for England, that he'll play for Lancs, and when he's finished playing for Lancs, he'll play for Burnley. Like it'll be interesting to see whether that happens. He's indicated that there are games for Lancs in September, and look, maybe he will. He might be required. They're bottom of the table. It could be a relegation scrap that he's involved in those 4 weeks across September. But yeah, whether he stays as the coach through the rest of his contract, it's a pretty good asset to take Anderson as your bowling coach. He's been doing it effectively for years anyway. Before we jump off this, Geoff, your favourite Jimmy moment?
My favourite Jimmy moment? I mean, the first test I covered professionally in 2013 at Trent Bridge is one of his finest. And it was, just an extraordinary game that we've talked about a number of times, the way it swings back and forth, the two massive 10th wicket partnerships. It's not just Agar and Hughes in the first innings, it's Pattinson with Haddon in the second. And it's the quality of Anderson in being able to have the cool, to have the composure to finish that game off, to get it's that last edge of Brad Haddon, isn't it? With 14 runs short, Australia were, I think,
11. I reckon.
Looked it up. It's such a tight finish. Everything's on the line. He takes 5 in each innings, and the quality is there. And the fact that he then goes on to play for another 11 years and take another 450 wickets or whatever it was is the extra ridiculous, remarkable bit.
Rounding off on Old England players, just very, very quickly, Monty Panesar is no longer a parliamentary candidate for George Galloway's party. He had a train wreck interview the day after Will and I spoke about it on Talk Radio, which was really something. Where the main part of Galloway's platform was to remove the United Kingdom from NATO, and Monty didn't know what NATO was and started referencing immigration, and the whole thing was a complete shambles.
Anybody who's seen his Mastermind segment would not be surprised that he's not up to date with NATO.
Quite. And look, he says here, he's quite humble in the statement that he's withdrawing because he needs more time to listen, learn and find my political home, one that aligns with my personal and political values. I genuinely think that he saw Reform doing well in the polls and he saw Galloway have some success in that by-election in Rochdale and he thought one was the other. I reckon I think he's confused the two parties.
Right.
Because his stuff on social media has been very Trumpy. And he's talked a lot about the stuff that Reform's talking about.
Yep.
And I just think he's confused the two. Anyway, no more Monty as a candidate. Geoff, we've got one more thing to get through.
It was confusing as to whether it was actually him or not, because he had a Twitter account that had some hundreds of thousands of followers, which has since been hacked and turned into a crypto scam account. And then he was posting from this account that when I saw it had about 200 followers, but everybody was posting this as though it was the legitimate thing, withdrawing his candidature. So I was like, is this actually him, or has everyone just not noticed, or did he just not bother trying to get his old account back, or I don't know. But you feel like he's been used in this situation to get a high-profile name for a crank party to get a bit of promotion, and it's worked. Yeah,
well, it did remind me of the Malmaninga, whose candidacy lasted 9 seconds, I think it was, for the ACT State Assembly. And Billy Brownless, that gets forgotten sometimes, that Billy was going to be the great saviour for Jeff Kennett in one of the Geelong seats in the 99 state election. He stepped out of Treasury Place after meeting with Kennett. And, he often gets the piss taken out of him on footy commentary. Well, he did years ago anyway about these types of things. But Billy for... was it Geelong North, possibly, if I recall correctly? But yeah, the Malmaninga, Billy Brownless, Monty Panesar dinner party. Let's make it happen.
I'd say from his broadcasting career, I wouldn't necessarily want. I loved Billy as a player. He was my childhood footballing hero. But
great.
Not sure that he's the guy that I'd want in charge of things he's good at, sitting on Ashley McIntosh's head and pulling in a screamer. Things he's not good at necessarily might be the more detailed analysis.
Spinning the big wheel as well. That was one of the great footy show segments when Billy and the wheel. I love him too as a personality.
If he could, if budget allocations would be done on the big wheel, and you go, well, so this year the health ministry is getting $65 million. Okay. Well, now let's do arts and culture. The big winners are the State Opera. Yeah, that'd be a way to do it.
Big part of our childhood there. All right, Geoff, before we go to the break, let's find time for some. We're taking the break first. Break now.
I think we've talked about James Anderson for so long that we have to break now and do the pledge after.
If we're breaking now, just before that, I'm going to say that cricket is all about balance. Okay. Balance at the crease so you can play forward or back. Balance in the slip so you can snaffle gravity-defying catches. Gary Balance, and finding comfort in all that is balance. New Balance. Get your hands on the trackies, jackets, hoodies, oversized shirts, and lounge shorts from New Balance Linear Heritage Collection from Westfield, London. And Westfield, Stratford City today, and you'll discover a whole new level of comfort previously inaccessible to anyone not at the Rancho Relaxo. With a long summer ahead where you'll be parked on the couch watching the cricket, why not do it in the same kit as Joe Root, Pat Cummins, and Stephen, Peter, Devereaux, Smith? Are you getting around in New Balance? You should be. Westfield, London, Westfield, Stratford City. More extra, less ordinary.
Lounge shorts.